Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is an herbal blend. I forgot the name. I think it's Night and Sleep. Yeah, it's I've had it forever, and honestly, I'm probably gonna start tossing some of my old tea, my old herbal teas, but it's still good, this one, so I thought I'd have it because it's a very relaxing, um like a nighttime kind of tea with mints and I think lemon oil, that sort of thing. And I think eucalyptus. I feel like I saw that in the ingredients. So I thought, why not? Relaxing. I could use all the relaxation I can get. I've been trying to catch up and do videos here for a while, but it's just really haven't been up to it because I had some work done in my apartment, which if you've ever had work done in your apartment, you know that it is exhausting, even if you're not doing a thing. But it's just been very loud, hard to concentrate. So my reading hasn't been as much either. But what are you going to do? And my health hasn't been wonderful either. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about books. I want to talk about what I have been reading or what I finished in November. And I finished other ones, but I've already talked about them. So these are the ones I'm going to talk about. The only thing I regret, and I say regret like as if, oh, I regret. No. The only thing I wish I would have done more of is read more nonfiction. I was reading nonfiction, but I didn't finish a lot. Um, and because it's supposed to be, at least, in terms of its original host and everything, Olive, the last nonfiction November, which is kind of sad to me. But I understand. I really wanted to go out with a bang, like I really wanted to read a ton of nonfiction in November. But like I said, things happen. So I'm only going to talk about this one because I already talked about Henry V book that I read recently. And I did, right? I talked about the Henry V book, right? That I finished it? Yes, I'm pretty sure I did. And if I didn't, Henry V by Dan Jones, totally worth it. Very good book. But this is a book that I mentioned briefly, I think, in a TBR situation. And I've been reading it since, I think, August. Now I got to get back to the library. That's my other regret. And I say this, I will always say this. I encourage all the time. Please, please support your public libraries. Please go there and, use the circulation as much as possible. But in my case, I just have so many books that I want to read that I own. And so that when I read more of my public library books than my home library books, I get a little like, oh. So I'm going to try to work on that, but it's always been a thing. And yet, I did like this book very much. The Secret Lives of Booksellers and Librarians, True Stories of the Magic of Reading. It's got some schmutz on it. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it says James Patterson and Matt Eversman. They are, I guess, the ones who put it together. The name James Patterson sells books. Actually, I'm not anti that. I don't really read a lot of his books, but he is very good at supporting writers and bookshops. And I am with his money, which he has, a good amount to give. So I am happy that he is like that. This is a compilation of just stories and like mini memoirs of people who work in libraries and bookshops, and I love it because it is the one thing that I wish I could have done, which is work in those types of situations, but I've never been in the position to be able to do so. So vicariously being that is always nice. And there's so many different types of situations. People who, it covers basically the United States and Canada. I would like to read more books like this that cover international, all types of places. But in the meantime, this was good. People who've worked many years in bookstores and maybe rose from, just selling books, stocking books, to being managers of some sort. Some own bookstores, some work in libraries, some, have very advanced degrees in some kind of entry level situations, work their way up, etc. And there's at least one person here who I know, although I'm sure she wouldn't know me by sight, or maybe she would, I don't know, who owns a bookshop in what is basically my neighborhood. It used to be a little bit closer. The location moved a little further away, but still in nice weather, walking distance. So I was, pleasantly surprised to see that she was in here. I was like, oh man. And authors that own bookshops. It is varied, and I can't get into every single one of them. they discuss the problems that arise, dealing with the public, dealing with all the things that have come up against booksellers, including COVID, and sometimes dealing with people who want to ban books or do other things to books and readers. So it's a good book, but it wasn't. I'm glad it's not like a. I wouldn't. Okay, let me finish the sentence. It's not a book that I would take with me on vacation and be my only book, because it's not exactly repetitive, but it is kind of. So it was a good book to read over a couple of months. And that is how I will recommend it. If you want a book about books that you can read just over time, get a hold of this book. Anyway, and I got to bring it back to my library because it is overdue big time. So but it was really good. I just wish it wasn't my only nonfiction. And here are some other books that I checked out of the library. All kind of different genres, which is great. These two are, yeah, anyway. This one is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. I mentioned this, I think, before, because this author, Nicholas Meyer, I read a book of his a few years back, didn't realize that he was still writing or doing anything, and was glad that he was. This is Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell, Nicholas Meyer. And it's like it's extracts from the diaries of John H. Watson, MD. So it's still Watson, Holmes and Watson story. It is well into their lifespan. It is actually during World War II. World War One. World War II, that'd be very much, not quite. Okay, so World War One. But nevertheless, they are trying to find a way to to help stop the war, or to get America involved, which would help end it sooner, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I guess that did happen. But so they have to intercept certain things, i.e., a telegram, and it starts out in England in 221. Is that 221? No, that happens later. Wherever John Watson was working, and he was still sort of working as a surgeon in some ways, helping out. Even though he was older, he could help out with the wounded, so that's helpful. So Sherlock Holmes shows up, and now they're having dealings with basically the successors of Mycroft. So slight spoiler: Mycroft, Sherlock Holmes' brother, is gone. He's dead. So they're his successors, who are now actually real people. There are photographs in here that show people who are actually real life people, some of whom I actually recognized, but not too many. What was it? Now it's His Majesty's Secret Service, and I guess it was back then. Things along those lines. I'm not that into espionage and spying and all that, but it does work around with mysteries. So they end up going to America together: Boston, DC, New York, and not in that order, and then riding tons of trains and getting shot at, and pretending to be dead at some points, and ending up in Mexico. So that's all I want to tell you, because I don't want to give away tons of spoilers. But and they have to figure out how to stop certain things from happening, from certain other groups getting involved that would distract certain other groups, etc. And it takes a little while for Sherlock Holmes to figure out how to make this happen and solve certain mysteries. Anyway, I didn't make it sound that interesting, but it was. It was action-packed, but not overly action-packed. It's not like constantly running around. These two gentlemen are not really young enough to be constantly running around anymore. Anyway, and Sherlock Holmes does occasionally question himself more than he used to, although he always questioned himself a little bit. At this point, he is not taking drugs anymore. He's not reliant on that. That was addressed in an earlier book of this writer. So I thought it was fun. It wasn't my favorite. Well, it wasn't my favorite Sherlock Holmes story. It wasn't my favorite Sherlock Holmes pastiche, or retelling, or whatever you want to call it. But I thought it was a good, fast enough paced, enjoyable adventure, kind of historical fiction, which I like too. I sometimes enjoy World War I fiction more than World War II. And maybe it's because there's been such a proliferation of World War II that it's nice to have something a little different. But anyway, I think it's not a bad book if you are into Sherlock Holmes. If you're not, I don't know. Maybe you like it, maybe not. There's a lot of references that you may not be able to get, and slight spoilers from his earlier books. But honestly, if you like to read all things Sherlock Holmes, it's worth it. It's not run, don't walk, but take a walk. Anyway, that sounded mean. Take a walk. No. Anyway, so the next one is supposedly the final book in a series, and this is I think middle grade. I don't think it's quite YA, but it's somewhere between that. And this is a series called the Pages & Co. series, or the Book Wanderers, and it's been enjoyable for people like me who loved Jasper Ford's Thursday Next novels. This is the younger, the kids' version of it, and I'm sure there's other versions too that I haven't read yet. But this is one major character who is the Tilly, who is the original character, and her friend, and then they meet other friends along the way. But Tilly lives in a bookshop with her grandparents and other people. I don't want to give away what happened in the earlier books, so I have to be careful in case you don't want to be spoiled. But she is talented in a way, in many ways, but in one way is that she can wander into books. Basically, when you're reading a book, you could become part of the book and interact with people. She has certain other abilities, which is she can extract things from books, and she's able to have fictional characters come out of the books and spend time with her, which in the early books was really exciting to me because people like Anne of Green Gables coming out, which was something I always wanted as a kid. So, of course, but she and her new friends and some older friends come across some really bad people who are trying to first take over the whole under library, they call it, which is all these people who are keeping things in order for the book wanderers, but also a particularly nefarious person who is trying to steal everybody's imagination. So in this book, they've met pretty much every fictional character that, mostly from children's books, but sometimes beyond. Anyone who could be written about that's in the public domain. But here they go more into myths and legends. So there are characters from Greek mythology, which I found interesting because I used to read a lot of that. And also Arthurian legends like Merlin. Not my favorite thing. I read, what was it, The Once and Future King once. And a couple of little Arthurian legends. It's never been my favorite part of, English, British legends or whatever. But it was good. It was good for the purposes of this book. It was fun, and it had a satisfying ending. I don't know if they could make more, but it had the feeling of, like, in other words, obviously this is fantasy, but it teaches you a lesson in terms of like what reading can do for you. And even though obviously, it's more literal here, it is true that sometimes you can wander into books yourself. Actually, you can. If you're a reader, if you really put yourself there, you can already use your imagination and become part of the story anyway. So I loved it. I love this series. I didn't mind it ending. It's not like I'm going to be, oh my goodness, I missed them so much, but because it was good. It was a satisfying ending, but it was just, all good things, right? Anyway, so it was very good. So the one non-library book that I read was an Anthony Trollope. Because I don't know if you can see behind me. Nope. There it is. Right below, you might see some orange books. A good chunk of them are these editions with Anthony Trollope's face. And I've been trying to read them, at least one a year if possible. And because they're not as big, the books, so it's like, why not, right? I'm finding the ones I have of this group have not been my favorites yet, though. I'd like to be proved wrong for another book. But this is An Old Man's Love, and this is one of his very last books. And I have to say, since I recently read Ayala's Angel, And I did like that very much. And that is also one of his later books. So he wasn't entirely without ability to write a good story in his older age. But I am finding that most of his later books that I come across have not been as enjoyable to me as his earlier books. I don't know if it's just because I love the Barsetshire Chronicles so much, but I don't know. I want to be proved wrong once again. I want to come across a lot more of his later books and say, hey, he was still good. But as it was, this book was okay, but I didn't love it. It was about a man who is not entirely, not rich, but he's doing okay for himself, and he takes in a fully grown but a daughter of an old friend of his whose parents and step-parents are all gone, so he takes her in because he has a home. And he is not an old man, in my opinion. He is 50. So that kind of threw me when I realized that the character who is supposed to be the old man is 50, because the closer I get to 50, which is not that far off now for me, it's like, don't go. But I know there was a point to that expression, to that title. Anyway, what happens is obviously they spend time together and he starts falling in love with her, and she appreciates him and wants to accept his offer, but she does let him know that there was someone that she had feelings for, and he, they didn't have an understanding, but he left, and she hasn't heard from him since, so she just wants to let him know. And as soon as that happens and she accepts him, very soon afterwards, this man shows up out of the blue. And now, he's ready to resume whatever. So now there's this whole, well, what should happen? What should this original person do? And anyway, this story to me dragged a little bit. It was like, I know what I would have done, but I also and I didn't exactly like the way it turned out. And some characters, like there was a housekeeper who is saying, oh, you should definitely marry each other, but when you do, I'm gonna leave because there's no room for me anymore. I'm going to go back to my horrible drunk husband that I have been away from for so long. And it's like, I think that was supposed to almost make it humorous, but it wasn't funny. It was just so confusing. Like, what is your problem? You're trying to encourage them or not? You're encouraging them, but you're guilting them. And so like there wasn't any characters that were particularly endearing, and all the main characters, I mean, the old man, I forgot his name. Let me get his name. William Whittlestaff. Sounds like little, but whittle. Littlestaff, in other words. Anyway, as opposed to Longstaff. So anyway, I like him pretty much as a character, but everybody else, nobody really, I never looked at anybody and said, oh, I particularly like this person, or I'm really rooting for this person. It was just okay. No, the characters were kind of bland. They had their moments, but nothing really attached me to them. And I feel like that was what was disappointing, because I know Anthony Trollope has always come up with such, even in books that weren't my favorite of his books, there were usually some characters that were fascinating, and there were some names and humor. I mean, the fixed period was bonkers, but otherwise I've almost never been as, I don't want to say let down, but a little bit. It was just like, okay, I don't hate this book, but oh, And what really upset me about this book, and I know people say, okay, it's of that time, but Anthony Trollope is usually pretty good at not saying these things. I'm not saying he never says anything that's a little of his time, but he uses a very offensive word that I cannot repeat. And it's not like a word that I could say and just say, I don't like this word. It is a word that I will not repeat. And I was like, there was no need for it. That was the problem. There was no need for that word. And that also took me out, because I was literally, and I don't consider myself too sensitive about things, but I was literally on the subway reading this book. And when that word came up, I went, like I was clutching my pearls. Excuse me. I was just so like, why did you do this, Anthony Trollope? Why? But anyway, I still love Anthony Trollope. I'm going to be talking soon about my reading plans, hopefully for next year, and he figures into them because he always will. And, still one of my very favorite writers. But I guess his prolificness, whatever the word is the problem with it is that there's going to be some slight duds. And I would still read this over a lot of Thomas Hardy books, for instance. Um, but kind of So I don't want to recommend. I don't want to recommend this book, but I would say if you are craving Anthony Trollope and this is the only one you can get a hold of, or if you're a completist and you must read all Anthony Trollope's, this will not be a nightmare book. It's not a horrible book at all. It's just if this was my only book I read by him, I probably wouldn't have continued. In other words, so don't let this be your first book or the introductory book for anyone of Anthony Trollope. It's not meant to be anyway. Anyway, so that was what I was reading in November, or at least what I finished in November. I'm still currently reading a lot of books that I started in November and previously, so hopefully I will cover those again soon. Let me know what you've been reading. Let me know if you read any nonfiction in November that was good, because I didn't talk about enough of it. And let me know if you've dealt with something particularly disappointing in a favorite author. Because yeah. Anyway, and that is all for now. This is Catherine, taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.